Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for new stories. In the bustling, neon-lit market of Nova Prime, the air crackled with the buzz of anticipation. Traders, diplomats, and tourists from across the galaxy flocked to the central plaza, their faces illuminated by the holographic banners advertising the day's event, the intergalactic servant auction. Humans were no longer a rare sight in the galactic community. In fact, they had become an unstoppable force, assertive, curious, and infinitely adaptable. Ever since humanity's first contact with the stars centuries ago, they had gained a reputation for their ingenuity and sheer willpower. Though still a relatively young species in the grand scheme of the universe, humans had proven themselves time and again in both diplomacy and combat. The galaxy had come to recognize them as a force to be reckoned with. Yet, there was something that humans as a whole had always lacked: the ability to create servants. Other species had perfected the art of genetic manipulation and artificial intelligence, crafting beings that could cater to every whim of their masters. Humans, for all their advancements, had never quite grasped the subtleties of creating sentient, beautiful, and obedient beings like those of the Grelosians or the Ezeri. This gap had long been a source of envy and desire for human elites. And now a solution had arrived. The auction was not for the typical slave or servant. No, these were personal companions, a more politically correct term in these enlightened times. The chosen ones would be genetically engineered, perfected beings designed to fulfill every desire and need. Beautiful, intelligent, and with an unwavering loyalty, they were perfect for those who could afford them. Standing near the entrance, observing the gathered crowd with a practiced air of disinterest, Commander Garrett Collins adjusted his uniform. He had fought in the wars against the Krell Consortium and had been awarded numerous accolades, but nothing prepared him for the spectacle of this auction. He had heard whispers of these beings, but the reality of the event exceeded his expectations. "Sir, are you sure about this?" Lieutenant Mara James, a sharp-witted woman with a no-nonsense attitude, stood beside him, her brow furrowed in skepticism. Garrett glanced at her. "We need an edge. A companion like this could prove invaluable. Just follow my lead." The bidding process began in a flurry of activity. Holodisplays blinked to life, showcasing stunning holograms of the first few candidates. Sculpted figures with flawless skin, intricate tattoos of their species symbols running along their arms, and eyes that seemed to glow with inner light. Each one was a masterpiece, a product of generations of refinement. Yet, it was the humans who were the most coveted. Though human geneticists had perfected their species, creating individuals with superior physical abilities, it was their intellect and resilience that made them so valuable. On the stage, the first candidate appeared, a Grelosian woman, tall and ethereal, her lavender skin glowing under the bright lights. She was elegant, a picture of calm, poised on the stage. A soft chime rang, signaling the beginning of the bidding. Starting bid for the Grelosian servant, 5,000 galactic credits. The auctioneer's voice boomed, amplified by the system. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Garrett raised his hand. 10,000, he called confidently. His voice was steady and loud enough to be heard by the auctioneer, who acknowledged his bid with a swift nod. Beside him, Mara's eyes widened. "You're bidding on a Grelosian?" "Just wait," Garrett replied with a grin, settling back in his seat. The next servant brought to the stage was an Ezeri female, tall and slender, with insectoid eyes and translucent wings that shimmered like liquid crystal. Her beauty was otherworldly, and the crowd gasped in admiration. Garrett sat forward, watching the bid spiral higher and higher. He didn't intend to spend much on these initial candidates. The real prize was yet to come. He scanned the crowd, the wealthiest and most influential of the galaxy's elite, each vying for control over the perfect companion. The bidding on the Ezeri woman reached astronomical numbers, and Garrett knew it was time to make his move. He rose from his seat and gestured to Mara, leading her towards the center of the room where the human companions were being prepared. "Garrett, I don't understand. Are you really going to bid on one of those?" Mara questioned, a mix of disbelief and concern in her voice. Garrett smirked. "Just trust me. These human companions will change everything." As they approached the final section of the auction, the anticipation in the room reached a fever pitch. A shimmering blue curtain was drawn aside, and there, standing under the spotlight, were the last of the candidates, the human servants. Each was more striking than the last. There were 2 men and 2 women, each a work of genetic artistry. They were dressed in simple attire, their bodies sculpted with precision, and their faces exuded confidence and allure. Their eyes, bright and filled with intelligence, scanned the room. Garrett studied them carefully. There was one in particular who caught his eye, a woman. She stood with her back straight, her posture regal, yet her gaze held a subtle defiance. Her long auburn hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her green eyes glimmered with a fiery intelligence. Her skin, a warm golden tone, seemed to radiate health and vitality. As the auctioneer introduced her, the crowd was silent. This, the auctioneer said, is Alara. A human servant, genetically enhanced for beauty, intellect, and obedience. She is not only capable of fulfilling your every desire but also possesses an unbreakable will that ensures your commands are carried out with precision. The moment the words left the auctioneer's mouth, Garrett's heart skipped a beat. He could see the fire in Alara's eyes, an undeniable strength. She was no mere servant. She was a force, one who could match him in intellect and determination. This is the one, Garrett muttered under his breath. Mara shot him a concerned look. Garrett, are you sure? He nodded, his gaze never leaving Alara's form. 25,000 galactic credits, he called out, his voice echoing across the room. The auctioneer's eyes flashed with interest. We have 25,000 galactic credits for the human servant Alara. Do we have more? Garrett stood tall, confident in his decision. He knew that this was no ordinary acquisition. This was the beginning of something far greater than anyone could have anticipated. The bidding continued, but Garrett didn't waver. As the price climbed higher, his confidence remained unshaken. Finally, with a sharp exhale, the auctioneer's voice rang out. Sold. To Commander Garrett Collins for 60,000 galactic credits. A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. Garrett's eyes met Alara's, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to disappear. She was his now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger game. A game that would change the course of human history. As the auction hall erupted in applause, Garrett stood still, his eyes locked onto Alara's. She did not smile, nor did she show any sign of emotion. Her posture remained as dignified as ever, but there was a flicker of something deeper in her eyes, a challenge, perhaps, or an acknowledgement of the weight of the moment. For all her beauty and genetic perfection, there was a certain rawness to her, a sense that she was not merely a servant to be owned. The auctioneer's voice broke through Garrett's thoughts, bringing him back to reality. The human servant Alara has been sold to Commander Garrett Collins for 60,000 galactic credits. Congratulations, Commander. Garrett gave a nod, his expression stoic, though inwardly, a rush of excitement and curiosity swirled within him. He had made the purchase without hesitation, but now, with the transaction complete, he wondered about the woman standing before him. What did it mean to own a being like her? Was she just another trophy, another beautiful face to accompany him through the galaxy's glittering halls of power, or something more? Mara stepped up beside him, her eyes narrowing slightly as she watched the exchange. You're really going to take her with us? Are you sure about this, Garrett? I've heard rumors about these companions. They're not all as obedient as they seem. Garrett turned to Mara, offering a reassuring smile. I'm not concerned about obedience, Mara. I'm concerned about her potential. She's different, and that's what we need. Mara said nothing, but her eyes betrayed her doubts. She had seen enough of the galaxy's dark corners to know that appearances were often deceiving. Yet, she trusted Garrett's judgment, even if this acquisition seemed unusual. Alara's escort, a burly Ezrai who had been standing at the edge of the stage, approached with a data pad in hand. Commander, the Ezrai said, its voice deep and rasping, we will initiate the transfer of ownership to your account. Alara will follow your command, but please understand she is unique. The bond between you two has not yet formed, and while she is highly trained, you may find her more difficult to control than others. Garrett nodded, his fingers twitching at the thought of the challenge. I'm not looking for control. I'm looking for someone who can keep up with me. Do the transfer. The Ezrai handed over the pad, and Garrett tapped his credentials into the system, completing the purchase. There was a brief pause as the data processed, and then the Ezrai nodded, signaling that the transaction was complete. Alara was his now. Without a word, Alara began walking down the steps of the stage, her movements fluid and graceful. She passed by Garrett, her presence undeniable. As she neared him, Garrett couldn't help but notice how the room seemed to part for her. Her beauty and poise commanded the space around her, and yet there was something about the way she carried herself that suggested she wasn't simply a servant. She was more than that. Mara, let's get to the ship, Garrett said, turning to his lieutenant. Understood, sir, Mara replied, but her gaze lingered on Alara, and Garrett could sense her wariness. Still, Mara didn't voice her concerns aloud. The walk to the docking bay was a short one, but Garrett couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation on his shoulders. He had made a decision that could alter the trajectory of his career, his life, and perhaps even the future of humanity in the galaxy. What would this bond with Alara bring? He wasn't sure, but he couldn't turn back now. Upon reaching the sleek, silver-hulled ship that would carry them to their next mission, Garrett took a moment to look back at Alara. She was standing a few paces behind him, her gaze forward, but there was an air of stillness to her, a quiet intensity that suggested she was studying him just as much as he was studying her. "Mara, you go ahead," Garrett said, his voice low. "I need to speak with Alara." Mara glanced at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of uncertainty. When she found none, she nodded and disappeared into the ship. Garrett waited until the sounds of her footsteps faded before turning to Alara. She stood there, silent, her eyes locked onto his. "You've made your choice, Commander," she said, her voice cool but not unkind. "But I need you to understand something. I was not designed to be your pet or your trophy. I was created to be your partner, and that means you must treat me as such." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "A partner, huh? That's a bold claim. I'm the one who paid for you, Alara. I own you." Her gaze didn't falter. "Ownership is a human concept. I'm not a thing to be owned. I am an individual with my own thoughts and desires. You may have purchased my body, Commander, but I am not yours to command as you would a mere tool." Garrett took a step closer, his expression unreadable. He wasn't used to being spoken to in such a manner, especially by someone he had just acquired. "I didn't buy you to argue with me, Alara. I bought you to serve me. So, unless you want to find yourself back on that stage, you'll remember your place." A flicker of something flashed across her eyes. Was it amusement? Anger? Whatever it was fleeting. "You misunderstand, Commander. I am not here to be your servant. I am here to aid you. I was designed to be your equal, not your subordinate. And if you truly intend to use me as such, we will both suffer." There was a silence between them, thick with tension. For a moment, Garrett considered her words. The truth was, he hadn't fully understood what he had bought. She wasn't like the others, who would obediently follow commands without question. Alara was different, strong-willed, sharp, and undeniably powerful in her own right. "I see," Garrett said, his voice softer now. "You're right. I don't know what this bond between us will be. But I intend to find out." Alara gave a slight nod, as if accepting his statement for what it was. "Good. Let us begin then. But know this, I will only be loyal to you if you prove yourself worthy of that loyalty." Garrett studied her for a long moment. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation. Only conviction. And in that moment something shifted inside him. This wasn't just about control or possession. This was about partnership. Perhaps for the first time in his life, Garrett was being forced to confront the reality that true power came not from domination, but from collaboration. "All right, Alara," he said with a smirk. "Let's see if we can figure this out together." Her lips curled into a faint smile, and for the first time, Garrett felt like he might just be on the brink of something far more profound than he had imagined. The days following the auction were a blur of military briefings and logistical arrangements as Commander Garrett Collins prepared for his next mission, a covert operation deep within the Krell Consortium's territory. It was a delicate assignment, one that required finesse, precision, and an ability to read the room. The last thing Garrett had expected was to find himself in a position where he had to balance the complexities of command with the intricacies of an alien partnership. Alara was not the kind of servant he had imagined. She had made it clear from the start that she was not interested in being anyone's subordinate, and though Garrett had purchased her, he could already feel the subtle tension between them. She was beautiful, intelligent, and resolute, but there was an edge to her, a quiet rebellion, that unsettled him. In all his years of military service he had never been challenged quite like this, and part of him found it unnerving. Yet there was something magnetic about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Her presence in his life was forcing him to confront ideas he hadn't been willing to entertain before. The value of respect, the strength found in mutual understanding, and the idea that perhaps his previous concept of power was flawed. Their first few days together were filled with silence, each of them retreating into their own corners of the ship. Garrett focused on preparing for the mission ahead, reviewing intelligence reports and coordinating with his crew. Alara, on the other hand, seemed content to observe from the sidelines, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. She had not once attempted to engage him further on the topic of their partnership, and Garrett, still unsure of how to navigate their relationship, decided to give her space. But it wasn't long before that changed. The ship was nearing Krell space when Garrett entered the common area of the ship's command deck, preparing for the final briefing before they made their move. He was surprised to find Alara standing by the viewport, looking out into the expanse of space, her arms crossed as she studied the stars. "You're not busy with the crew?" Garrett asked, leaning against the doorframe. Alara turned her head slightly, her eyes catching his. "I've been observing," she said, her tone calm but laden with an almost imperceptible challenge. "You and your crew are preparing for a mission, but you haven't yet considered the Krell's tactics. You are planning for a frontal assault, but you may not be considering all the angles." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Alara stepped away from the viewport, her gaze never leaving him. "The Krell are known for their subterfuge and psychological warfare. They won't just be waiting for you with weapons at the ready. They'll try to manipulate you, make you doubt your mission, your crew. You need to prepare yourself for that, not just physically but mentally." Garrett took a step forward, intrigued. "And you think I'm not prepared?" "I think you're preparing for the wrong battle," she replied coolly. "You focus too much on the logistics, the strategy, the weapons. But you haven't considered how the Krell will attack your mind. They'll twist your perception, make you question your decisions. If you're not ready for that, the mission will fail." Her words hit Garrett harder than he expected. He had been so focused on the operational aspects of the mission that he hadn't fully considered the psychological toll it could take on him and his team. The Krell were notorious for their psychological warfare, using advanced neuromanipulation devices to cloud the judgment of their enemies. The last time Garrett had faced them, he had barely made it out alive. He had dismissed the Krell's ability to influence minds before, but Alara's calm demeanor and sharp observations were making him rethink that strategy. "You're suggesting that I could be manipulated?" Garrett asked, his voice low. Alara nodded, her expression unreadable. "I'm suggesting that you need to be prepared for the possibility that you and your crew may be subjected to tactics you've never encountered before. And the only way to counter that is by understanding the Krell's methods and developing your own defenses." Garrett studied her, wondering if she was simply trying to provoke him, or if there was something deeper to her insight. "And how do you know so much about them?" Her eyes narrowed slightly, her voice a touch softer. "I've studied them. I was created to understand the complexities of alien cultures, including the more manipulative ones like the Krell. I've been trained to read subtle cues in behavior, patterns of thought, and emotional responses. I may not have direct experience with their tactics, but I know how they operate." Garrett's mind raced. He had dismissed Alara as a mere acquisition, someone to serve his personal needs, but now, with her sharp analysis, he began to realize that she might be more than just an enhancement to his personal life. She could be the edge he needed to survive in the dangerous political and military environment of the galaxy. "All right," Garrett said after a long pause. "I'll trust your judgment on this. Let's go over the Krell tactics together. You're right, we need to think beyond the battlefield." Alara nodded, a faint smile crossing her lips. "I'm glad to see you're listening." The two of them spent the next several hours poring over intelligence reports, discussing possible psychological warfare tactics, and devising strategies to counter them. Garrett found himself increasingly impressed by Alara's intellect. Her knowledge was not just theoretical, it was practical, grounded in an understanding of the subtle dynamics that could make or break a mission. She helped him design a series of psychological defenses for his crew, methods to maintain focus, stay grounded, and remain resilient in the face of manipulation. As they worked, Garrett found himself wondering just how much more Alara could offer him. She wasn't just a companion, she was a strategist, an ally, and perhaps the most valuable asset he had ever acquired. The mission began soon after, and the tension was palpable. They entered Krell space under the cover of darkness, their stealth technology cloaking their ship from detection. Garrett's crew was ready, and the briefings they had conducted with Alara's guidance had given them a renewed sense of focus and clarity. They were prepared not just for the physical threats, but for the psychological traps that could await them. As they neared the Krell installation, Garrett glanced at Alara. She stood at his side, her expression calm, but her eyes were sharp, alert. They both knew the risks. The real battle would be one of the mind. When they finally landed on the Krell station, the doors of the ship slid open and Garrett stepped out, leading his team. The cold, sterile atmosphere of the station greeted them, its silence oppressive. Every step they took echoed in the vast, empty halls. "I'm detecting subtle fluctuations in the station's atmosphere," Alara said quietly, her voice barely audible over the comms. "They're attempting to manipulate your emotions. It's subtle, but it's there. Keep your focus." Garrett nodded, his hand on his weapon, but his mind was alert, thanks to Alara's preparation. The tension in the air was thick, but he felt more in control than he ever had. He wasn't just walking into the lion's den unprepared. He was walking in with a strategy, a plan to outthink the Krell and to survive their psychological warfare. "Stay sharp, everyone," Garrett commanded his team, his voice steady. "We've got this." And as they ventured deeper into the heart of the Krell installation, Garrett couldn't shake the feeling that Alara had already become more than just a partner. She had become a trusted ally, someone who could stand beside him, not just as a companion but as an equal. Together they were ready for whatever the Krell had in store. The heart of the Krell installation was like a labyrinth, cold, metallic, and silent. As Garrett and his team navigated its narrow corridors, the tension in the air was almost tangible. Every sound seemed amplified in the dead silence of the station. The walls, adorned with strange alien symbols and circuitry, hummed faintly as though alive. It was the kind of place that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Garrett's eyes scanned the shadows ahead, his hand resting lightly on his weapon, ready for anything. His thoughts kept drifting to Alara. She was right there beside him, her sharp gaze ever watchful. She hadn't been wrong about the psychological warfare the Krell would employ. The subtle manipulations were everywhere, faint vibrations in the air, almost imperceptible shifts in the light, whispers just beyond the edge of hearing. They had already begun. The deeper they moved into the station, the more Garrett could feel it. At first, it was small things, his team becoming overly cautious, second-guessing their every step. It was almost like a pressure, like a presence in the shadows, watching them. He could feel the unsettling pull in the back of his mind, urging him to hesitate, to question his mission. But he fought it back. Alara had been right. The Krell would attack their minds, break their resolve before they could break their bodies. But Garrett had prepared. He wasn't going to fall for it. "Stay sharp," he murmured to his team, voice low but commanding. He looked over at Alara, who had an unreadable expression on her face. She wasn't affected by the manipulation. She seemed almost immune to it. "Are you all right?" Garrett asked quietly, his voice barely a whisper. Alara's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, there was something almost comforting in her gaze. "I'm fine. But you should remain alert. The Krell are masters of this kind of manipulation, but they've underestimated you." Garrett felt a surge of confidence at her words. "You've got that right." They reached the central chamber of the station, a vast room filled with glowing interfaces and holographic projections. The chamber was quiet, too quiet. The faint hum of machinery was the only sound, and it sent a chill down Garrett's spine. He motioned for his team to hold position, signaling for them to spread out and maintain a perimeter. Suddenly the lights flickered. Then the voice came. "Commander Garrett Collins." The voice was smooth, laced with an alien malice that sent a shiver down his spine. It echoed from the walls, seemingly coming from every direction at once. "We've been expecting you." Garrett's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, but he kept it holstered. He wasn't going to draw until he had to. "Show yourself," he demanded, his voice steady despite the growing sense of unease. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall and humanoid, its features obscured by a dark cloak that shimmered like liquid metal. Its eyes glowed with an eerie green light, and its lips curled into a mock smile. The Krell were known for their unsettling appearance, and this one was no exception. "We've been watching you, human," the figure said, its voice reverberating through the room. "You are bold to enter our domain, to challenge us so openly. But you have made a grave mistake." Garrett's team tensed, weapons at the ready, but Garrett held up his hand. "We didn't come here to negotiate," he said, his voice cold. "We came to take what we need and leave." The Krell figure chuckled, a sound that grated on Garrett's nerves. "Is that so? You think you can simply take what you want, human? You are entering our domain without understanding the consequences. We will break your mind, Commander. We will make you doubt your every decision, your every move. You will become nothing more than a puppet in our hands." The room seemed to pulse with energy, and Garrett felt it again, the pressure on his mind, the whispering doubts creeping into the corners of his thoughts. His head throbbed slightly as if something were trying to claw its way into his mind. But Alara was already moving. She stepped forward, her presence radiating with confidence. "You misunderstand," she said, her voice clear and sharp. "You cannot break what is already broken." The Krell figure paused, its glowing eyes narrowing. "And what is that supposed to mean?" Alara's gaze didn't waver. "It means you cannot manipulate me. And you cannot manipulate him." She nodded toward Garrett. "We are not like your other victims. You might have broken others before, but you will not break us." Garrett glanced at her, surprised by her boldness. He had always known she was different, but hearing her speak so confidently to the Krell made him realize just how much he had underestimated her. She wasn't just his companion, she was a force in her own right. The Krell figure's eyes flickered with irritation, and for a moment, the lights in the room grew dimmer, the air heavy with menace. "So be it," it hissed. "You will regret this." Without warning, the room shifted. The walls seemed to pulse, the floor beneath Garrett's feet vibrated, and suddenly the space around them seemed to twist, as though reality itself was warping. The air thickened, and the room became a blur of shadows and shifting forms. "Keep your focus," Ilara shouted, her voice cutting through the disorienting noise. "They're attempting to disorient us. Don't let them." Garrett gritted his teeth, pushing through the wave of disorientation. He had been in tight spots before, but this was different. The Krell weren't just fighting him with weapons, they were trying to break his mind. But he could feel Ilara's presence beside him, strong, unyielding. Her calmness anchored him, and in that moment he realized that he wasn't alone. She had told him she was his partner, not his servant. She was right. "Focus on the objective," Garrett muttered to his team. "Don't let the illusion distract you. Find the Krell source, now." His team moved swiftly, their movements synchronized, their minds steeled against the Krell's manipulations. Garrett could see them fighting the mental fog, their eyes sharp, their resolve hardening. This wasn't the first time they had faced mental manipulation, but this was the first time they had a strategy, one that Ilara had helped them create. As they advanced deeper into the chamber, Garrett's focus narrowed. The pressure in the air intensified, but he didn't flinch. Ilara was right beside him, her gaze unwavering as she scanned the room. Then he saw it, a small console hidden in the far corner of the room. A single glowing orb hovered above it, casting an eerie green light. "That's the source," Garrett said, pointing toward it. The Krell figure, still looming in the shadows, snarled. "You think you can destroy it? You're too late. The trap is already set. You're already ours." But Garrett didn't hesitate. He motioned to his team and they surged forward, weapons raised, toward the console. Ilara was at the front, her hand glowing with energy as she reached out to deactivate the device. And in that moment, Garrett realized, this wasn't just about winning the mission. It was about overcoming the Krell's power to control minds, to turn their enemies into puppets. They had prepared, they had fought through the manipulations, and they were about to win. As Garrett's team surged forward, the Krell console's eerie green glow pulsed in time with the oppressive energy filling the chamber. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though invisible hands were dragging them back, but Garrett pressed on, his focus unwavering. Beside him, Ilara moved with the precision of someone entirely unaffected by the chaos. Her movements were fluid, purposeful, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. The Krell figure raised an elongated hand, and the room seemed to ripple. Shadows stretched and writhed across the walls, forming grotesque shapes that whispered Garrett's deepest fears. "Stop them," the Krell hissed, its voice slicing through the room like a blade. "You will not disrupt the flow." A sudden wave of psychic energy slammed into the team and Garrett felt his knees buckle. His mind spun, his vision blurred. For a moment he was no longer in the Krell chamber. Instead he stood in the wreckage of an old battlefield, one he thought he had buried deep in his memories. The cries of fallen comrades echoed around him, their faces twisted in pain and betrayal. He saw himself standing amidst the carnage, blood on his hands as their voices accused him. "You could have saved us, Garrett. Why didn't you?" Ilara, standing near the console, saw Garrett falter. His body stiffened, his hand gripping his weapon like a lifeline. She recognized the signs. The Krell were digging into his mind, exploiting his memories, twisting them into a weapon against him. She had warned him this would happen, but even she hadn't anticipated the full intensity of the Krell's psychological attack. "Ilara," Garrett's voice was barely audible over the chaos. I can't." Her gaze snapped to him, her voice firm and commanding. "Garrett, focus on my voice. This isn't real. It's a projection, an illusion. Look at me." Garrett's breathing was ragged, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. Slowly he turned his head, locking eyes with her. Her steady presence was a beacon in the storm of his mind, and for a moment, the cacophony around him dulled. "You've faced worse," Ilara said, her tone unwavering. "This is their game, but you're stronger than this. Remember what we prepared for." The battlefield dissolved, and Garrett found himself back in the Krell chamber. He gasped, the air feeling too thick, but the shadows no longer seemed as oppressive. He nodded to Ilara, the tension in his body easing. "I'm with you." "Good," she said, her lips curving into a small smile. "Now let's end this." The Krell figure snarled, its glowing eyes narrowing as it realized its attack had failed. It raised both hands and the shadows in the room coalesced into solid forms, creatures with jagged claws and writhing limbs, their faces featureless save for glowing green orbs where eyes should be. Defensive positions. Garrett barked, his voice steady now. His team snapped into action, forming a protective perimeter as the shadow creatures surged forward. The fight for control. The battle that followed was a chaotic blur of light and shadow. Garrett's team fought with precision, their weapons tearing through the shadowy forms with bursts of energy. The creatures shrieked as they dissolved into nothingness, but for every one they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. Ilara darted toward the console, her movements graceful yet determined. The Krell had created these shadow constructs to buy time, but she knew the real fight was with the console. If they could disable it, they could shatter the Krell's psychic influence over the chamber. "Cover me," she called out, her voice cutting through the din. Garrett didn't hesitate. "You heard her. Focus fire on those shadows, give her space." The team adjusted their formation, creating a narrow corridor of defense around Ilara. Garrett himself stood at the front, his weapon blazing as he mowed down the advancing constructs. He could feel the weight of the Krell's attention on him, its hatred like a palpable force in the room. "You cannot win, human," the Krell hissed, its voice dripping with venom. "This is my domain. You will fall." Garrett smirked, his confidence surging. "We'll see about that." Ilara's gambit. Reaching the console, Ilara examined it with practiced efficiency. The glowing orb hovered just above the console's interface, pulsating with a rhythmic energy that felt almost alive. It was the source of the Krell's power here, the device amplifying its psychic manipulations. She reached out, her fingers brushing the console's surface. A jolt of energy shot through her and she winced, but she didn't pull back. Instead, she focused, her mind a fortress against the Krell's attempts to infiltrate her thoughts. "I need a moment," she called out, her voice strained but determined. Garrett nodded, firing another burst of energy at the nearest shadow. "You've got it. Take your time." The Krell figure shifted, its form becoming more substantial as it stepped closer to Ilara. "You will not touch that device," it roared, its voice a crescendo of fury. Garrett moved to intercept, placing himself between the Krell and Ilara. "You're not getting to her," he growled, raising his weapon. The Krell hesitated, its glowing eyes narrowing as it studied him. "You would die for her? A servant? A creation?" "She's not just a servant," Garrett said, his voice low but resolute. "She's my partner. And we don't leave each other behind." For the first time the Krell seemed uncertain. It recoiled slightly as though the concept of loyalty, of trust, was foreign to it. Victory and unity. Ilara's hands flew over the console's interface, her mind racing as she bypassed the Krell's security protocols. Finally she found it, a pulsating core of energy at the heart of the console. Without hesitation, she plunged her hand into the holographic display, channeling her own energy into the device. The room shuddered violently, and the shadow constructs froze mid-motion, their forms wavering. The Krell figure let out a guttural scream, its voice fractured and distorted. "No. You cannot." Ilara gritted her teeth, her focus unwavering. With one final surge of energy she shattered the console's core. The glowing orb above it dimmed, then shattered into 1,000 fragments of light. The room fell silent. The shadows dissolved and the oppressive weight in the air lifted. Garrett's team lowered their weapons, their expressions a mix of relief and exhaustion. The Krell figure staggered, its form flickering. It glared at Garrett and Ilara, its eyes burning with hatred. "You think this is over? This is only the beginning." Then it vanished, its form disintegrating into a cloud of green mist. Aftermath. Garrett turned to Ilara, his breathing heavy but steady. "You did it?" She looked up at him, her expression calm but with a hint of exhaustion. "We did it." He offered her a small smile. "I couldn't have done it without you." Ilara tilted her head, a spark of amusement in her eyes. "I believe that's the point of a partnership." Garrett chuckled softly, then turned to his team. "All right, let's secure the area and get what we came for. Mission's not over yet." As the team began their work, Garrett and Ilara shared a glance. They had faced the Krell's worst together and emerged victorious. But they both knew this was just the beginning of their fight. The Krell would not take this loss lightly. Together they would be ready for whatever came next. With the console destroyed and the oppressive psychic energy dissipating, the Krell installation felt lifeless. The faint hum of alien machinery was the only sound, and the shadows that had seemed so menacing moments ago were now just shadows. Garrett stood at the center of the chamber, scanning the room as his team secured the area. "Status report," Garrett barked, his tone professional but tinged with fatigue. "We're clear," said Ramirez, his second in command. "No signs of activity from the Krell or their constructs. Whatever Alara did seems to have disabled their systems." Garrett nodded, his eyes settling on Alara. She stood near the shattered remains of the console, her hand resting lightly on its surface. She looked calm, composed, but Garrett could sense the strain she had endured. "You all right?" he asked, stepping closer. Alara turned to him, her lips curving into a faint smile. "I'm fine. Their attempts to infiltrate my mind were ineffective." "I'll say," Garrett replied with a smirk. "You were incredible back there." Her gaze softened slightly. "Thank you, Garrett. But this isn't over. The Krell won't let this go unanswered. They've suffered a significant loss today, and they will retaliate." Garrett sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "One problem at a time. Let's secure the tech we came for and get out of here." The extraction begins. The Krell installation's central chamber contained an array of alien devices, each pulsating with a faint, otherworldly glow. The tech was advanced beyond anything humanity had encountered before, and securing it could shift the balance of power in their favor. Ramirez and the rest of the team began cataloging the equipment, carefully dismantling the smaller devices for transport. Alara assisted, her knowledge of Krell technology proving invaluable. She moved with efficiency, explaining the function of various components and warning the team of potential traps or failsafes. Garrett watched her work, his mind racing with questions he hadn't had time to ask. He had always known there was something unique about her, something that went beyond her being a designed AI. Her ability to resist the Krell's manipulations, her knowledge of their systems, and her unwavering composure in the face of danger all hinted at a deeper story. "Alara," he said, his tone low enough to avoid catching the attention of the others. "We need to talk when we get back to the ship." She glanced at him, her expression neutral. "Of course. But for now we should focus on completing the mission." Garrett nodded, though he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to her than she let on. The first sign of trouble. As the team worked, a faint vibration coursed through the floor, almost imperceptible at first. Garrett frowned, his instincts kicking in. He held up a hand, signaling for silence. The team froze, their eyes darting around the room. "What is it?" Ramirez whispered. "I don't know," Garrett replied. "But something doesn't feel right." Alara straightened, her gaze fixed on the far end of the chamber. "The Krell rarely leave their systems unguarded. It's possible they've activated a secondary protocol." As if on cue, a low, guttural hum filled the air. The lights in the chamber flickered, and a new presence made itself known. From the shadows, a towering figure emerged, its form encased in an intricate exoskeleton of dark, chitinous armor. Its eyes glowed with a menacing red light, and in its hands, it held a weapon unlike anything Garrett had ever seen, a staff-like device crackling with unstable energy. "Alara," Garrett muttered, his hand moving to his weapon. "What are we dealing with?" Her eyes narrowed. "That's not a standard Krell soldier. It's an enforcer, a guardian of high-value assets. They are formidable." The enforcer's gaze swept over the room, and then it spoke, its voice deep and resonant. "You have trespassed in the domain of the Krell. You will not leave this place alive." Garrett raised his weapon, his team following suit. "Looks like we've got company. Everyone defensive positions." The battle against the enforcer. The enforcer moved with terrifying speed for something its size. In an instant, it was upon them, its staff releasing arcs of energy that forced the team to scatter. Garrett rolled behind a console, narrowly avoiding a blast that vaporized the floor where he had been standing. "Alara, we need options," he shouted, firing a series of shots that barely seemed to faze the enforcer. She moved swiftly, analyzing the situation with uncanny precision. "Its armor is highly resistant to conventional weapons. We'll need to target the joints. Those are its weak points." "Ramirez, focus fire on its legs," Garrett ordered. "We need to slow it down." The team adjusted their strategy, concentrating their fire on the enforcer's knees and ankles. Sparks flew as their shots struck home, and the enforcer let out a roar of frustration. It swung its staff in a wide arc, forcing the team to retreat further into the chamber. "Alara, can you disrupt its systems?" Garrett called out. She was already working, her hands moving rapidly over a nearby console. "I'm attempting to override its command protocols. Keep it occupied." "Easier said than done," Garrett muttered, narrowly dodging another blast. The sudden betrayal. As the battle raged on, Garrett noticed something odd. One of his team members, Private Lutz, was behaving strangely. Instead of engaging the enforcer, Lutz was moving toward the chamber's far wall, where a smaller console blinked with faint green light. "Lutz, what are you doing?" Garrett shouted. Lutz didn't respond. Instead, he pressed a sequence of buttons on the console, and a hidden panel slid open, revealing a secondary device, smaller but clearly important. Garrett's stomach sank as realization dawned. "Lutz, step away from that console," Garrett commanded, his voice sharp. Lutz turned, his face blank, his movements mechanical. "I cannot. The Krell must succeed." "Elara, what's happening to him?" Garrett demanded. Her expression darkened. "He's compromised. The Krell have taken control of his mind." Before Garrett could react, Lutz activated the device. The room shuddered violently and the enforcer roared, its strength renewed. Elara's console flickered and she cursed under her breath. "They've reactivated the defense grid," she said. "I need to disable it again, but it will take time." Garrett clenched his jaw, his mind racing. "Ramirez, neutralize Lutz. We can't let him do any more damage." Ramirez hesitated, his weapon trained on their compromised teammate. "But sir." "Do it," Garrett barked. With a pained expression, Ramirez fired, the shot striking Lutz squarely in the chest. The private crumpled to the floor, the device slipping from his grasp. Garrett forced himself to push aside the guilt. There was no time for hesitation. The turning point. Garrett turned his attention back to the enforcer, which was now bearing down on the team with renewed vigor. "Elara, whatever you're doing, do it faster." She didn't respond, her focus entirely on the console. Garrett fired another volley at the enforcer, his shot striking its damaged knee joint. With a grinding noise, the joint buckled and the enforcer staggered, its movements slowing. "Elara," Garrett shouted. "Almost there," she replied, her fingers flying over the controls. Finally, she struck a final key and the enforcer froze mid-stride. Its red eyes dimmed, and its body collapsed to the ground with a resounding crash. The room fell silent. Garrett lowered his weapon, his breathing ragged. "Is it over?" Elara straightened, her expression grim. "For now. But the Krell will know what happened here. We need to leave, immediately." Garrett nodded, his gaze sweeping over his team. They had won the battle, but the cost was clear. And the war against the Krell was far from over. The team moved swiftly through the alien corridors of the Krell installation. The once glowing walls were now dim and lifeless, their strange energy drained by Elara's actions. Despite their victory, Garrett's instincts screamed that they weren't safe yet. "Elara, how much time do we have before they regroup?" Garrett asked, keeping his voice low. "Not long," she replied, her tone calm but urgent. "The Krell will deploy reinforcements as soon as they recalibrate their systems. We must reach the ship before that happens." Behind them, Ramirez and the remaining team members carried the salvaged Krell technology in secure containers. The weight of their haul wasn't just physical. It was the key to understanding and possibly defeating the Krell, but it came at a heavy cost. Garrett's thoughts flickered to Lutz, who had been a friend as much as a soldier. The memory of having to take him down gnawed at him. As they approached the exit, the ground beneath them trembled. The walls around them shuddered and a low, resonant hum filled the air. "They're locking down the installation," Elara warned. "We must move faster. The pursuit begins." The team broke into a run, their boots pounding against the sleek, metallic floor. Behind them, the hum grew louder, accompanied by distant echoes of machinery stirring to life. The Krell weren't just sealing the installation, they were activating automated defenses. "Drones incoming," Ramirez shouted, his weapon already raised. From the shadows ahead, sleek, spider-like machines emerged, their multiple limbs bristling with weaponry. They moved with unnerving speed, their glowing eyes fixed on the intruders. "Engage," Garrett barked, diving for cover as the first wave of plasma bolts whizzed past him. The corridor erupted into chaos as the team returned fire. Garrett's rifle spat bursts of energy, each shot aimed at the drone's vulnerable joints. Ramirez and the others held the line, their coordinated attacks keeping the machines at bay. "Elara, can you disable them?" Garrett called out. "I'm trying," she shouted, her hands flying over a portable interface she had pulled from her belt. Sparks flew as she attempted to hack into the Krell network. "These drones are operating on a separate system. It's more sophisticated than I anticipated." "Then we'll hold them off," Garrett said, gritting his teeth as another drone fell to his shots. "But hurry." A desperate gamble. The drones kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. Despite the team's efforts, the pressure was mounting. Ramirez shouted as a bolt grazed his shoulder, and another team member went down, clutching a seared wound. Garrett, we can't keep this up. Ramirez yelled, his voice strained. Garrett knew he was right. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and their escape route was quickly closing. He glanced at Alara, who was still focused on her device, her expression a mix of determination and frustration. Alara, we need options, he called out. I can disable the drones, she replied, not looking up. But it will require redirecting all my energy reserves. If I do this, I won't be able to assist further, not until I've recharged. Garrett's mind raced. Alara's support had been critical to their success thus far. Losing her now would put them at even greater risk. But without her intervention, they wouldn't survive the drone onslaught. Do it, he said firmly. We'll cover you. She nodded, her fingers moving faster across the interface. I need 30 seconds. The turning point. Those 30 seconds felt like an eternity. The team fought with everything they had, their weapons overheating from the constant firing. Garrett found himself dodging plasma bolts by mere inches, his muscles aching from the effort. Finally, Alara's voice rang out. Got it? The drones froze mid-motion, their glowing eyes dimming. Then one by one they collapsed to the ground, their limbs curling inward like dead insects. The sudden silence was deafening. Garrett exhaled a shaky breath. Good work. Let's move before they send reinforcements. Alara stood, her movements slower than before. She looked pale, her usual energy noticeably diminished. Garrett reached out to steady her. Are you all right? He asked. I'll recover, she said, her voice softer than usual. But we must not delay. The final stretch. The team reached the outer perimeter of the installation, where their ship waited. The sight of the sleek vessel filled Garrett with a surge of relief, until he noticed the figures standing between them and their escape. A group of Krell warriors, their armor gleaming under the artificial light, blocked the path. At their center stood a familiar figure, the enforcer they had fought earlier. Its damaged form had been repaired, its glowing red eyes burning with renewed hatred. You will not leave, the enforcer declared, its voice a thunderous growl. The knowledge you have stolen belongs to the Krell. Garrett raised his weapon, his team following suit. He knew they were outmatched, but there was no turning back now. Alara, any tricks left up your sleeve? He asked, his voice tight. She shook her head. I've used all my reserves. This fight is yours. Garrett nodded, his resolve hardening. All right then. Let's finish this. The battle for freedom. The fight was brutal and chaotic. The Krell warriors moved with precision, their tactics designed to overwhelm. Garrett's team fought back fiercely, but they were exhausted, their numbers dwindling with each passing moment. Garrett found himself face to face with the enforcer. The towering figure loomed over him, its staff crackling with energy. It swung the weapon in a wide arc, forcing Garrett to duck and roll. He fired point blank at the enforcer's chest, but the shots barely left a mark. You are resilient, human, the enforcer said, its tone almost mocking. But you cannot win. Watch me, Garrett snarled. He darted forward, aiming for the enforcer's damaged knee joint. His shot struck true, and the enforcer let out a roar of pain as its leg buckled. Taking advantage of the moment, Garrett unleashed a barrage of fire at its chest, driving it back. Now, he shouted to his team. Get to the ship. We escape. The team sprinted toward the vessel, dragging the crates of salvage technology behind them. Garrett was the last to board, firing a final shot at the advancing Krell before the ship's ramp closed behind him. Go, 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 he shouted to the pilot. The ship roared to life, lifting off just as the Krell forces closed in. Garrett watched through the viewport as the installation shrank into the distance, his chest heaving with a mix of relief and exhaustion. The revelation. Once they were safely in orbit, Garrett turned to Alara. She sat quietly, her eyes closed, her energy slowly returning. He crouched in front of her, his voice low. Alara, we need to talk. Back there, you knew too much. You weren't just following programming. She opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his. For a moment she was silent. Then she spoke. You're right, Garrett. There's more to me than you were told. My creators, they didn't just design me to serve humanity. They designed me to understand the Krell. Understand them? Garrett repeated. What does that mean? Alara hesitated, then said, It means I was created using fragments of Krell technology, and their consciousness. Part of me is them. The room fell silent, her words hanging heavy in the air. Garrett stared at her, his mind reeling. But then he nodded, his resolve steady. You've been with us every step of the way, Alara. I don't care what you're made of. You're one of us. Her expression softened, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Garrett." As the ship sped through space, carrying its precious cargo and its weary crew, Garrett knew their fight with the Krell was far from over. But with Alara by their side, he felt a glimmer of hope. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.